The first American thing that made Liesel Bauer doubt the Reich was not a speech. It was not a newspaper. It was not even the news that Germany was losing. It was a square of baked macaroni and cheese, cut from a dented army pan, covered in a buttered crumb crust, and served to her on Christmas Eve inside a prison camp in the Allegheny Mountains. She thought it was a banquet dish. She thought only a wealthy country would waste that much milk, butter, flour, and cheese on enemy prisoners. Then an American cook told her the truth. His mother made it on Wednesdays, not for Christmas, not for officers, not for rich people, for ordinary children coming home from school. And that was the moment Liesel realized the most dangerous American weapon might not be a tank, or a bomber, or a rifle. It might be the ordinary life Germany had been told did not exist. November 28, 1944. The transport truck climbed a narrow road through dark Pennsylvania timber, its canvas cover snapping in the cold. Inside, 24 German women sat shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, trying not to lean into one another when the wheels dropped into ruts. Their gray auxiliary uniforms were stiff with salt from the Atlantic crossing. Their boots were cracked. Their faces were pale from seasickness, fear, and the strange humiliation of still being alive after capture. Liesel Bauer kept her hands folded in her lap. 31 years old, former signals clerk, good German diction, good posture, good memory. The kind of woman officers trusted with frequencies, dispatches, and lists of names that were not supposed to be lost. 6 months earlier in Brittany, she had been told the Americans were soft, childish, undisciplined. A country of loud movies, weak men, and starving workers kept calm by jazz and lies. Now she was riding into their mountains as a prisoner. Beside her sat Marta Klein, 19 years old, a blonde radio assistant from Dresden who had spent most of the voyage whispering the same prayer under her breath. Her brother was at the Eastern Front. Her mother was somewhere under the bombing. Her father had not written since July. Marta had asked Liesel 3 times what Americans did to women prisoners. Liesel had answered the only honest way she could. I don't know. The truck slowed, then stopped. Cold air poured through the opening. A young American corporal stood outside, with his rifle slung too loosely to look frightening. His cheeks were red from the wind. Snow had melted on the brim of his helmet and run down the side of his face. He looked at the women as if he had expected monsters and found tired girls. Aussteigen in German, so careful it sounded borrowed. No one moved. The corporal swallowed, then tried again, softer. Please out. One by one they climbed down. Liesel's boots touched frozen American mud. She looked up and saw Camp Laurel. It was not the fortress she had imagined. It was a former civilian conservation corps camp rebuilt in a hurry for war. Low wooden barracks, a mess hall with smoke lifting from a black pipe, 2 guard towers, chain-link fence strung with barbed wire, pine trees pressing close beyond the wire as if the forest were watching. Everything looked temporary. Everything smelled of wet wood, coal smoke, and army soap. A woman in an American officer's uniform stood near the administration hut. Captain Eleanor Hayes was older than the corporal, perhaps late 30s, with a narrow face, steady eyes, and the calm manner of someone who had decided not to waste motion. Her translator, a schoolteacher from Pittsburgh in a borrowed coat, read the rules in German. Roll call at 6, breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, supper at 1800, lights out at 2100, no contact beyond the wire, no leaving the compound. Medical complaints were to be reported immediately. You will be treated under the rules of war, the translator said. You will be fed. You will receive medical care. You will not be harmed. The words fell into the yard and froze there. None of the German women believed them. Not yet. Inside the barracks, 24 iron cots waited beneath 24 gray blankets. A pot-bellied stove glowed in the center of the room. Fighting the cold and losing. Liesel chose a cot close enough to feel some heat but far enough to see the door. That was training. Never sleep where you cannot see who enters. Marta took the cot beside her and sat with both hands gripping the metal frame. Do you think they hate us? She whispered. Liesel looked at the door, at the guards outside, at the unfamiliar country surrounding them. They should, she said. Then after a breath, but I don't know if they do. That first week, the women behaved as if dignity were the only uniform they still owned. They stood straight at roll call. They answered only name and number. They spoke German among themselves and lowered their eyes when guards passed. They ate together at the same end of the mess hall, leaving a visible strip of empty benches between them and the Americans. The food unsettled them more than the fence. Breakfast came with white bread sliced thick enough to shame a bakery, eggs scrambled soft with milk, oatmeal with brown sugar, and coffee that tasted weak but never ran out. Supper came with potatoes, stews, beans, canned peaches, sometimes meat, not scraps, not bone broth, meat. In late 1944, German cities were counting bread in grams. Families were stretching potatoes until even the peels felt valuable. Soldiers rode home asking for fat, sugar, anything that still tasted like life. But in Camp Laurel, enemy prisoners were given seconds. At first, Liesel assumed it was theater, a performance for inspectors, a trick. The women whispered that the Americans were trying to soften them before interrogation, but no interrogations came, only routine. Roll call, food, cold, more food. Silence, and the slow, humiliating discovery that the enemy was better at keeping prisoners alive than Germany was at keeping civilians warm. Marta became ill during the second week of December. It began as a dry cough after morning roll call. By nightfall it had become deep and wet, rattling through her chest every time she tried to breathe. Liesel sat beside her cot and listened to the sound with growing fear. She had heard lungs like that in field hospitals. She had watched healthy-looking men die after 3 days of pretending a cough was nothing. By the next morning, Marta was swaying in line, lips pale, eyes glassed with fever. Corporal Daniel Reed was counting them that day. He was 23 from Ohio, though the women did not know that yet. He had a habit of checking his clipboard twice, because he was terrified of making mistakes in front of Captain Hayes. When Marta's knees buckled, Liesel caught her under the arm. Reed looked up. For 1 second his face showed training, then concern overrode it. "Cranky?" he asked. "Sick," Liesel said in English, surprising herself. "Very sick." Reed ran. The German women stiffened, expecting punishment, expecting a doctor with restraints, expecting some hidden rule to reveal itself. He came back carrying blankets, a thermos, and a small brown bottle from the infirmary. Behind him came the camp nurse, a broad-shouldered woman with silver hair tucked under her cap. Marta began to struggle when she saw the nurse. "No," she rasped in German. "No hospital." The rumor was older than any of them. Prisoners taken to enemy medical rooms did not return. Liesel knew it might be propaganda. She also knew fear did not care whether it had been taught honestly. Captain Hayes arrived minutes later. She took in the circle of German women around Marta, the nurse waiting, Reed standing uselessly with an armful of blankets. Then she made a decision. The nurse would examine Marta in the barracks, in front of the others. No force, no closed doors, no mystery. That choice did more damage to Nazi propaganda than any lecture could have done. The nurse listened to Marta's chest, gave her medicine, showed Liesel how often to give warm water, and told the translator that if the fever rose again, they must call immediately. Reed left 2 extra blankets on Marta's cot. Before he went, he looked at the sick girl and said very carefully, "Besser bald. Better soon." Marta's fever broke on the 3rd night. By morning she was weak but alive. The women did not speak about it openly, but something had shifted. A guard had run for help before asking permission. An officer had chosen dignity when fear would have been easier. An enemy nurse had kept her hands visible so a sick German girl would not panic. Those facts did not fit the story Liesel had been given. They sat inside her like stones. Christmas approached under low clouds and hard wind. The Americans decorated badly. That was the first thing that made some of the younger women almost laugh. A crooked wreath hung on the mess hall door. Paper stars cut unevenly from ration forms appeared in the windows. Someone tied red ribbon around a stovepipe until Captain Hayes ordered it removed for safety. The effort was clumsy, but it was effort. On December 20, Captain Hayes came to the barracks with the translator and the head cook. His name was Joseph Alvarez, though everyone called him Joe. He had heavy hands, a flower-white apron, and the grave expression of a man who considered food a serious moral responsibility. The translator announced that on Christmas Eve the camp would serve a special meal. Not because the women had earned it, not because the war had softened, because Captain Hayes said, "No one should pass Christmas pretending it is just another day." The prisoners said nothing. Joe stepped forward, embarrassed but proud, and explained the menu. Roast chicken, potatoes whipped with butter, green beans, fresh rolls, apple cobbler, and a large baked macaroni and cheese casserole with cream sauce, sharp cheese, ham bits, and a buttered crumb crust. The translator struggled over the dish. "Macaroni mit Käsesauce," she said. "Gebacken, with ham. Like a pudding but not sweet." The German women stared. Macaroni, cheese, cream, butter, ham, baked together in one pan. Marta leaned close to Liesel. "For prisoners?" Liesel did not answer. She was doing arithmetic in her head. Milk was rationed in Germany. Butter was a memory. Cheese had become a rumor in many cities. Ham was something families described to children, so they would know what had existed before the war. and the Americans were putting all of it into one dish for captured enemy auxiliaries. That night the barracks filled with speculation. Some women said the dish must be ceremonial, like a roast goose. Others said it was probably an officer's meal being shared for Christmas as a calculated insult. One older prisoner, Frau Seidel, insisted no ordinary nation could afford to cook that way unless it had stolen half the world. Liesel said nothing, but she remembered the American magazines Reed had left near the barracks door. Advertisements for kitchen ranges, children holding glasses of milk, supermarkets with pyramids of canned goods, families smiling around tables too full to be real. She had dismissed those pictures as propaganda. Now she was not sure. Christmas Eve came bright and brutal. Snow reflected the sun so sharply the yard looked cut from white metal. The women woke early. They combed their hair with wet fingers. They brushed mud from their skirts. Marta tied a ribbon around her braid, then untied it because she was afraid it looked too eager. At 1100 hours, Reed opened the barracks door. He wore a pressed uniform and boots polished badly but sincerely. "Christmas meal," he said in German. "Please come." The mess hall had been transformed, not beautifully. Honestly, white cloth covered the tables. Pine branches lay in jars. Candles stood unlit because fire rules would not allow them, but someone had placed them there anyway. No German flags, no victory banners, no humiliation. Just a room trying to become gentle. The women sat together, backs straight, hands folded, faces controlled. Then the food arrived. Chicken first, browned and shining. Bowls of potatoes, green beans with butter, rolls still warm enough to steam when torn open, apple cobbler under a sugared crust, and finally the casserole. 2 soldiers carried it in a deep army pan, its top blistered golden brown, edges bubbling with cheese sauce. Joe cut it into squares with a wide spatula, each piece lifted slowly, stretching pale strands of melted cheese before dropping onto the plate. When Liesel's serving landed in front of her, she stared at it. The smell was unlike German Christmas food. Not spice, not vinegar, not dark bread. Milk, salt, toasted crumbs, soft pasta, a hidden sweetness from the cooked onions, smoke from the little pieces of ham. Marta lifted her fork as if she were afraid to offend the dish. She tasted first. Her face changed. Not into happiness exactly. Into disbelief. "It's good," she whispered. Then more urgently, "Liesel, it's very good." The others began to eat. Control lasted perhaps 3 minutes. After that, hunger defeated ideology. The casserole was rich without being noble, soft without being weak. The crumb topping cracked, the inside gave way, and the cheese sauce clung to everything like warmth. It tasted like being allowed to be full. Liesel ate slowly at first, then faster. The first plate disappeared. Joe came by with the pan. "More?" he asked. The translator repeated it. Some of the women looked down, ashamed of wanting it. Marta held out her plate. Then another did, then another. Liesel held out hers last. Joe served her a second square without comment, as if appetite were not a confession. The meal lasted more than an hour. No one rushed them. No one mocked them for eating. Captain Hayes walked between tables, making sure the older women had hot coffee and the younger ones had enough cobbler. Reed stood near the door smiling like someone who had helped build a small impossible thing, and could not believe it was still standing. Near the end, Frau Seidel asked the question. She did it in German, stiffly through the translator. "This macaroni dish, it is for Christmas?" Joe looked confused. "For today, yes." "No," Frau Seidel said, searching for the words. "I mean in America. This is a Christmas food? For important days?" The translator repeated it. Joe blinked. Then gently he shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "My mother makes it on Wednesdays." The translator hesitated, perhaps understanding before the rest of them what the answer would do. Then she translated. "My mother makes it on Wednesdays." The mess hall went silent. Joe, not realizing the size of the silence yet, continued. "Not every week, depends on rations. But it's not fancy, it's what you make when you want something warm and filling. Macaroni stretches the cheese, a little ham flavors the whole pan. Kids like it, workers like it. It's ordinary food. Ordinary." The word entered the room like a thrown stone. Marta looked down at her plate. "Ordinary," she repeated. Liesel felt heat rise in her face. Not from shame over eating, from the collapse of a structure she had not known she was still standing inside. The Reich had taught her America was hollow, a starving country pretending to be rich, a decadent place where workers were exploited, families were weak, women were foolish, and comfort was a mask for decay. But this dish was not masquerade. It was too simple to be propaganda, too plain to be staged, too wasteful in the German wartime sense, to be ordinary anywhere except a country whose ordinary life had more margin than Germany's promises. Frau Seidel asked, voice thin. "Before the war, was there more food than this?" Joe's face softened. "Yes," he said. More than now. The translator's German became very quiet. More than now. Liesel looked around the mess hall, at the white bread, at the butter, at the full coffee urn, at the second helpings offered to prisoners who had been trained to expect cruelty, and for the first time, she wondered whether Germany had not only lied about America, she wondered whether Germany had lied because it had to. Because the truth would have been too dangerous. After Christmas, Camp Laurel changed in small ways before it changed in large ones. The women still stood for roll call. They still slept behind wire. They were still prisoners. But silence no longer held the barracks like a locked door. English words appeared inside German conversations. Coffee. Blanket. Thank you. Good morning. Marta practiced with Reed when she thought Liesel was not watching. He would point at objects and say the English word. Window, stove, plate, snow. Marta would repeat them, then teach him the German. Fenster, Ofen, Teller, Schnee. Their lessons were clumsy and cautious, but they made the barracks feel less like a bunker. Liesel resisted longer. She told herself she was being careful. She told herself leadership required distance. She told herself kindness from the enemy was still enemy kindness. Then in January, Captain Hayes gathered the prisoners in the mess hall and told them what Allied soldiers were beginning to find in Europe. Not rumors, not battlefield losses. Camps, places built not to hold soldiers but to erase civilians. Jewish families, political prisoners, Roma, the disabled. People marked as enemies by a government that had taught its servants to call obedience virtue. The translator's voice shook once, then steadied. Captain Hayes did not shout. She did not accuse the women as if each had built the gates. She did not excuse them either. You will hear more, she said. Some of it you will not want to believe. Some of it you may not be able to believe until the war is over. But I will not pretend you are children. If your country committed crimes in your name, then truth is part of what you must survive. The room seemed to lose oxygen. Marta turned white. Frau Seidel whispered that it was Allied propaganda. Another woman began to cry without making sound. Liesel sat perfectly still. She had known of harsh camps. Everyone had heard something. There were things one learned not to ask, things one stepped around because survival under the regime often meant choosing not to see the edges of certain facts. But systematic killing? Mass starvation? Children? She thought of her husband Otto, killed near Smolensk in 1942, and the letters he had written about duty, sacrifice, clean purpose. What had he died serving? What had she served by keeping radios clear and messages moving? Marta raised her hand. Her voice was barely audible. How do we know you are not lying to us the way we were told you lied about everything? Captain Hayes nodded as if the question had weight. You don't know yet, she said. Not fully. Then she looked at the empty plates from lunch stacked near the kitchen. But ask yourselves what you have seen. Have we starved you? Have we beaten you? Have we taken your sick and hidden them? Or have we treated you like human beings when your own government told you we could not? No one answered. They were thinking of Marta's fever, of Reed's blankets, of Joe's casserole, of ordinary Wednesdays. That winter became the season of letters. In February, Red Cross mail arrived in thin envelopes that smelled faintly of damp paper and distance. Women took them with trembling hands. Some opened them immediately. Some could not. Liesel waited until the barracks quieted, then unfolded the letter written in her sister Anka's hand. Mother was alive. Their building in Leipzig still stood, though the windows were gone, and the stairwell had cracked in one raid. Food was scarce. Coal was worse. People traded wedding silver for potatoes. The war, Anka wrote, is lost. Everyone knows it. Only the posters continue fighting. Near the end of the letter, a line stopped Liesel's breath. We hear things now, things about what was done to people taken away. I do not know how much is true. I am afraid it is more true than we can bear. Liesel read that sentence 3 times. Marta's letter was worse. Her mother had survived the Dresden bombing with a broken arm. Her younger brother had not. For 2 days Marta barely spoke. Reed left food near her cot without trying to make her eat. Joe sent warm milk with a little sugar stirred in, and when Liesel returned the cup, he only nodded. No speeches. No solution. Just care placed where grief might eventually notice it. By March, the snow began to soften. Mud returned to the yard. The women were asked if they would help plan an Easter meal. At first, Liesel thought Captain Hayes had misunderstood captivity itself. Celebrate with guards? Decorate a camp. Share traditions with the country holding them behind wire. But the younger women wanted work. Purpose. Something that was not waiting. So they painted eggs with dyes made from onion skins and beets. They taught Joe to braid Easter bread. He ruined the first batch by treating the dough like biscuit dough and apologizing to it as if bread could forgive him. Marta laughed for the first time since her letter arrived. It startled everyone. Even Marta. Reed cut paper flowers so badly that Frau Seidel took the scissors away from him and demonstrated proper technique with the severity of a schoolmistress. One afternoon, Liesel found Joe in the kitchen holding a notebook. "My grandmother was from Bremen," he said through Marta. Though by then Marta barely needed to translate. "She wrote recipes. I can't read the German. Maybe you can." He handed the book to Liesel. The handwriting was old, slanted, and familiar in a way that hurt. For 20 minutes, Liesel translated a recipe for plum cake, while Joe listened as if she were giving him military intelligence. That was when she understood something she had been resisting. America was not one thing. It was not the cartoon Germany had made of it. It held German grandmothers and Irish famine stories and Mexican surnames and Ohio farm boys and women officers who did not need cruelty to prove authority. It held contradictions. It held abundance and ration books at the same time. It held prisoners behind wire and fed them until the lie of enemy subhumanity became harder to carry. On May 8, 1945, the loudspeaker crackled before breakfast. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The women stood in the barracks and did not know how to feel. Some crossed themselves. Some sat down hard on their cots. Marta covered her mouth and wept without knowing whether the tears were relief or mourning. Liesel felt nothing at first, then everything. Otto was still dead. Germany was still ruined. The camps were still real. The flag she had served had fallen, and beneath it lay things no surrender document could bury. That afternoon, Captain Hayes called them to the mess hall. Her voice was formal, but her eyes were tired. Repatriation would begin in stages. Some women would return to Germany through processing centers. Some with family in allied countries might petition for transfer. A few, depending on background investigations, letters of support, and immigration review, could apply to remain in the United States after the war. No one spoke. Remain? In America? The word did not feel like an offer. It felt like being asked to step through a door that had not existed a moment before. Captain Hayes did not make it sound easy. There would be questioning, paperwork, English requirements, letters, work, suspicion from Americans who had lost sons in Europe. Years of proving they were more than the uniforms they had worn. But the choice, she said, will be yours to request or refuse. No one will be ordered to build a life here. That night, the barracks did not sleep. Frau Seidel said Germany needed its daughters. Another woman said Germany had devoured them and called it duty. Marta said nothing until nearly dawn. Then she whispered, "My mother told me to live where the ceiling is still above me." Liesel turned toward her. "Will you stay?" Marta looked across the dark room toward the window, where the first gray light was touching the wire. "I think so." Liesel's choice took longer. Her mother and sister were alive. That should have been enough to pull her home. But what was home now? A room without glass, a city without fuel, a nation that would have to learn shame as a second language. And what could she bring back? Another hungry mouth, another woman with a past in uniform, another pair of hands in a country buried under rubble and questions. In America there would be suspicion, but there would also be work, food, distance, a chance to send packages home instead of standing in line for them. She sought out Reed near the fence one cold evening in late May. He was checking a latch that did not need checking. "Corporal Reed," she said. He looked up. Liesel. The use of her first name would once have offended her. Now it only made the question easier. "Why did you help Marta that first week?" He frowned, not understanding. "When she was sick." "You did not know her. You did not know if she hated you. You did not ask permission first." Reed rested one hand on the fence post. "My grandmother came from Ireland," he said. "Famine years. She said when she got here, people she couldn't understand gave her soup, not because she earned it, because hungry is hungry." He looked embarrassed by his own answer. "Guess I saw a sick girl. Not much more complicated than that." Liesel waited for the larger philosophy. There was none. That was what made it larger. Hungry is hungry. Sick is sick. A person is a person before a uniform can finish explaining why she is not. 2 weeks later, Liesel signed a petition to remain with a church guarantee in Pennsylvania while her case was reviewed. So did Marta. 15 of the women chose to return to Germany. 9 asked to stay. No choice was clean. No choice erased guilt. No choice restored the dead. But choice itself felt like the first civilian object any of them had held in years. On the last night before the return group left, Joe cooked a small supper for all 24 women. Nothing festive. Nothing grand. Baked macaroni and cheese, green beans, coffee, apple slices. The women ate quietly, each understanding that the dish had become more than food. It was the first crack in a wall, The first proof that the enemy's ordinary life was not what they had been told. The first American lesson that had not arrived as a lesson. Marta asked Joe for the recipe. He wrote it on a ration form, careful and slow. Macaroni, milk, flour, butter, cheese, a little ham if you have it, crumbs on top, bake until brown. At the bottom he added a sentence in block letters. Good for Wednesday. Marta folded the paper as if it were a letter from home. 21 years later, Liesel Bauer stood in the kitchen of a narrow brick house in Erie, Pennsylvania, stirring cheese sauce in a blue enamel pot. Her name was Liesel Bauer no longer. She was Liesel Martin now, wife of a high school mathematics teacher, mother of 2 American children who complained about homework in English and argued about baseball teams as if the world had never ended. The kitchen window was open. Lake wind moved the curtain. On the table lay a letter from Anki in West Germany, full of ordinary miracles. A new apartment, a reliable stove, enough coffee for guests. Their mother had died the year before after seeing one photograph of Liesel's children and saying they looked well fed. That had been her blessing. Marta lived 3 streets away. She had married Daniel Reed in 1949 after years of paperwork, disapproval from both sides, and a church picnic where she beat him at horseshoes so badly his uncle declared her an American already. Joe Alvarez still sent Christmas cards. Captain Hayes visited once, older and slower, and stood in Liesel's kitchen watching her pour macaroni into the casserole dish. You kept the recipe, Hayes said. Liesel smiled. It kept me. Every Wednesday, Liesel made it the way Joe had written it, not because it was fancy. Because it was not. That was the point her children never fully understood. To them, macaroni and cheese was supper. A good supper, if their mother browned the crumbs right, but supper all the same. They did not know what it meant to see cheese stretch from an army pan and realize a government had built part of its power on teaching people to envy a lie. They did not know what it meant to be fed by those you had been ordered to despise. They did not know that a full plate could become evidence. Her daughter Ruth came in carrying school books. Are we having macaroni again? Yes. Why every Wednesday? Liesel turned down the burner. She could have said because it was cheap, because your father likes it, because I know the recipe by heart. Instead, she wiped her hands on her apron and told the truth. Because once when I was very frightened, someone gave me this food and expected nothing back. Ruth frowned. Was it special? Liesel looked at the casserole dish waiting on the counter, the pasta, the sauce, the crumbs, the ordinary shape of grace. No, she said. That is why I remember it. At dinner, her family bowed their heads. Her husband passed the serving spoon. Cheese stretched from the pan to the plate, golden and stubborn. For a moment, Liesel was back in Camp Laurel, behind wire, holding a fork over a food she did not understand, surrounded by women who were about to learn that the world was larger than their fear. Then the memory passed. The house remained. The table remained. The children asked for seconds, and Liesel served them until the pan was almost empty, because the dish that changed her life had never been a feast. It had only been Wednesday, and Wednesday had been enough.